Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started. Leslie's passing out a handout. I'm Stephanie Lane. I'm on the Education Committee, and we have a great program this morning. Before we get started, I'd like us to begin in prayer. Okay, let's open in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time together, whether sitting in this room or engaging from home. Thank you for the chance to open our minds, to learn together, to see things we may have learned before in a new light, and to always seek your guidance. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. Okay, Kristin Hunter is our speaker this morning. She's from Atlanta, joined Trinity about 20 years ago with her husband Bob and daughters Evelyn and Claire. She has served on session and currently sits on the Faith and Action Committee. And Kristin's been a teacher at Westminster for 29 years. While she has held administrative and coaching roles there, her primary and most consistent role has been in the classroom as an English teacher. Thank you, Kristin.
Sure. Everybody hear me? All right. I'm glad to be here, and I was thinking as I prepared that I've never spoken about Jane Eyre to adults. So I have probably taught this book, if I had to estimate, maybe 10 times. I've probably read it about 12 times. And I've taught it always to juniors in high school, so 17-year-olds. And I mentioned that at the outset because I'm not a lecturer in my classroom. The longest I talk without the kids talking is probably 10 to 15 minutes. My class is very discussion-based, and I say that because you should feel very welcome to raise your hand and interrupt me. I'm used to being interrupted by strange events. I think somebody's going to ask a profound question, and they ask to go to the bathroom. It's kind of fun to share what really is such an important novel to me with anyone, and definitely unusual to talk about it with adults. And I'm going to start with a brief story about my sort of journey to this book and to being an English teacher. A few weeks ago when we had the panel about reading, I talked about the fact that for me, literature is far more than an academic or an intellectual pursuit. It's something that has been a real guide to me. When I went to college, I was in pre-med, and I was pre-med because I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I had been very influenced by someone that some of you all know, the Reverend Ron Greer. He's the pastoral counselor at Peachtree Methodist Church, has had a very significant influence on my life, married my husband and me. And because of his work as a counselor, I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist. I really wanted to study the stories of people, and that became vividly apparent to me when I was in a biology lab and we were dissecting cockroaches, no lie. And I had this epiphany, and I was like, I'm in the wrong place. And I went and found my advisor at UVA. It was the 80s. I don't know how I found her, because no phones, whatever. And I walked into her office. Her name was Cindy Aaron, history professor, and she looked at me and said, "What do you love?" Because I said, "I'm drowning." I mean, I was making really poor grades in these science classes, and I was really surprised. And she said, "What do you love?" And I said, "Literature and writing." And she said, "Well, then this is where the English department is. That's where you need to go." And my life was changed forever. And in those classes at UVA, I certainly learned how to read well, how to write well, but I also recognized that there were certain writers, certain books that really gave me a sense of what it means to grow as an individual, this particular book that we're going to talk about this morning, Jane Eyre. And by the way, who's read Jane Eyre? No? Oh, wow. Oh, awesome. If you haven't read, warning, there's probably going to be a few plot spoilers. In my class, plot spoiling is a crime. But I'll try to, because there's some big secrets that get unveiled. But in this particular book, if you haven't read it, it's essentially the story, it's a coming-of-age story. It tells the story of this young girl, Jane Eyre, who is an orphan. Both her parents have died. It has some Cinderella elements at the beginning. She would be rolling in her grave. If I just said it's like Cinderella, it's much more complex than that. But she lives with her family, the Reeds. They are very cruel to her. And she really has to make her way. She moves through these different homes. She lives in 5 different homes. Eventually falls in love. That gets really messy. She has to leave, and it's a whole thing. And so this coming-of-age story is something that I have taught numerous times, and it's, yes, she finds her way, but all the while she's thinking about her spiritual beliefs. She's encountering issues of economics, of what it means to be a woman in this time, and someone who had such a vivid imagination. And that's part of what I want to talk about, how her particular spirituality grew out of this. So that's essentially the story. I would say it has a happy ending. Some of my students love the ending. Some of them are furious about the ending. Can say more about that later. But I just want to say a little bit about her background. As you'll see, she did not live a long life. It is stunning the amount that she wrote in that period of time. Jane Eyre is her most famous novel. She wrote a few others. And her famous sisters, Emily and Anne Bronte, Wuthering Heights, Agnes Grey. I mean, it's remarkable. So these 3 sisters who lived in northern England wrote some of the most famous British novels of all time. They have a brother named Patrick. There were also 2 other sisters who died as children. Patrick was a bit of a mess. He was an artist. He got the most education, but he was the most unstable. And Charlotte spent a lot of her life trying to support her brother, help him stay sober. He struggled with addiction. And so I always want to point out that, yes, she's an artist. She's a vivid imagination, but she wanted to sell these books because at times the family was financially unstable. And this is the only portrait that has been legitimized. It was found like in somebody's closet somewhere about 100 years ago, and that gold column, it's believed, was actually Patrick put himself in the portrait, and then for some reason he blocked himself out. But Charlotte's on the far side, then you have Anne and Emily, and I'm always curious as to what she looks like, and that's the only one that's been legitimized. I want to say a little bit about, you're going to get to see in a minute, a couple years ago, my husband Bob and I and our daughter Claire actually went to the Bronte home, and one of the most remarkable things that we saw there were these teensy little books, and the children grew up in a home where they were given free reign of their father's library. So the father, Patrick Bronte, was raising these children on his own mostly. Charlotte's mother died when Charlotte was about 5 years old. So Patrick Bronte was left with 6 children at the time of his wife's death. And they were a very close family. They all had vivid imaginations. And they wrote these books that her biographer says ended up being over 62,000 words worth of fables, bizarre myths. Some of the titles are The Green Dwarf, An Adventure in Ireland. And these are little kids in the north of England writing on sugar wrappers, scraps of wallpaper, and it's like they created this imaginary world. And I think that was one of the ways that they managed in a life that really was affected by considerable grief. And from this grew these remarkable stories. And in these tales, they're often wondering about, what's real, what's imagined. And I've grown to think that for Charlotte, the line between, or the boundary between life and death was thin. Right? She had this sense of this imaginary, mythical world that inspired much of her work, and I also think gave her some grounding, and at times when her family had really some difficult and some instability in their existence. But these, and you can't really read, like the writing is teensy tiny. It's believed that Charlotte wrote most of it, and one thing that her biographer says is that they were intentionally meant to be illegible. It wasn't meant for other people. It was meant for themselves. And so the siblings developed very, very close bonds. I love the line, "We wove a web in childhood." And Emily Bronte in particular did not manage well when she was separated from her siblings. And she was furious when Charlotte decided she wanted to get all their books published. Their books were originally published under male pseudonyms, so no one knew that the Bronte sisters had actually written the books at first. Of course, at the time, women were not generally being published. And then when the book was so successful, Charlotte revealed that it was them. And Emily, that was supposedly a point of great tension between the two sisters, because Emily preferred to remain anonymous, where Charlotte is essentially trying to support her family again because Jane Eyre was so successful. All right, so here I am. This is the Bronte home. Yeah, Bob likes to correct me. It's called the parsonage, actually. 2 years ago, our daughter was studying in Oxford, and I said, we should go to the Bronte home in Haworth, England. It's 3 hours north. Bob gets kudos because we went to see where they lived. Patrick Bronte was the vicar and lived here in the parsonage. And as you see, this is their front yard. So remember what I just said about that thin boundary. So if you grow up stepping out of your home and this is what you see, perhaps this sense of those who have gone on doesn't feel so far away. And here we go. Wait.
So we have reached the...
Okay, so I'm going to show you a brief video, and here you will hear Bob correct me again to say that correctly. So one thing that, and I know I'm going to run out of time today, but in addition to being, this, she had a real sense of language, very well educated, very well read. She also had some horror, like there's some very scary parts. I noticed in my description, I had originally said to Libby I was going to talk about the Gothic in Jane Eyre. Those of you who know the story, like there's some really scary moments for Jane when she wakes up and she feels like there's a goblin in her home. And I think that writing about the Gothic gave Bronte as a woman some room to explore things that would have been considered off limits for a woman to be writing about. She's really questioning, where do we find God? Where can we find truth and meaning in the dark places? So anyway, I wanted you to see a bit about where she lived, and at the end you'll get a shot of my daughter Claire, who was at the time a freshman in college, who was along for Mom's pilgrimage.
So we have reached the Bronte parsonage, and if you will look in front of the house at the cemetery, lots and lots of folks in the cemetery, and there are many crows. Gives a kind of haunting vibe. And then there is the Bronte home.
Parsonage.
Parsonage. Bob is correcting me, of course. And then when you circle around here, you will see the old school room. This is built by Patrick Bronte, and this is where Charlotte had her wedding in 1854. So it has been a treat to see this place. To be here with Claire and Bob. All right, signing off.
It's a delightful town.
So we have
And it's like Bronteville. I mean, they have Bronte Pub. They have, everything you could possibly want that's named after the Brontes. And it was just a total delight for me to be there. And the family is buried there. I do think it's great that in Westminster Abbey, and if you've ever been to Westminster Abbey in London and Poets' Corner, that's where many of the greats of British literature are memorialized or buried. Charlotte, Emily, and Anne do have a plaque there, but they're not buried there. They're all buried here in that church where you see at the end of my video. So you have some sense of, the world that she came from. And I think it was a world that was governed by grief, love, imagination, and a love for language and literature. And out of this came this remarkable book, Jane Eyre. And so this hangs in my classroom. It's one of the more famous lines from Jane Eyre. And it's at some point in the book, she's speaking to Rochester. Bob keeps wanting to call him Heathcliff. That's Wuthering Heights. So Rochester often, and he is what's considered this Byronic hero. He's dark, he's mysterious, he has some bad stuff in his past. He is deeply in love with Jane, and he keeps wanting to turn her into something that she's not. And one of her most famous lines is, "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me." And that is also something that speaks to her spirituality. She did grow up in a faithful home, of course, her father being the vicar, but much of Jane Eyre is a critique of the church because of some of what she encountered. And I want to talk about that a bit, and we're going to read a little bit, and I've even got husband Bob, who's going to read some lines. I don't think we're going to get to all of this, but what I would like to talk about a bit is this the early section of the book, like I said, when she's a young girl, and she's living with the Reeds, and she gets in trouble a good bit in the house because she talks back to her aunt. And as a young girl, she has a real sense of, she's not afraid to express her indignation, which was not considered appropriate for a young girl. Her cousin John is a bully. I mean, he's physically and verbally abusive to her. And she fights back. And at one point, they throw her into what's called the Red Room. And she believes she sees her dead uncle. It's one of my students' favorite parts because it's like a ghost is coming back to life. And it's very interesting because the narrator, Jane, is looking back as an adult, and she says, "I realize now it was probably just a lantern flashing by." She has a sense of like the practical explanation, but then she still says, "My vivid imagination as a child led me to believe that my deceased uncle was coming back." And it's terrifying. And that's where her aunt puts her when she talks back. And before we read the scene, I just want to share a bit about at the time when Charlotte Bronte was a young girl, there was a very severe minister, severely Calvinistic. I know we have a Calvinistic tradition here, but this is like hardcore. And he wrote books for children that are terrifying. In 1836, William Wilson, he wrote The Child's First Tales. And in these books, children are struck dead when they misbehave. Mid-tantrum, a boy falls to his death. There's one story called Dead Boy, about a boy who dies because he's skating on the Sabbath. And these are the books that she would have read. She read everything that had language that, came across, came into her hands. And at the same time that these books are being published, her older sisters have gone off to a charity school for families who could not afford an education for their children, and her two older sisters died there because of the conditions of the school. And the school is run in large part by some of these religious figures for whom she has profound disdain, and she's not afraid to sort of cultivate that in her writing. So this is what I'd like to look at. So what I've done in your this little packet, it was hard to choose, but I've taken a few sections, and we'll see what we get to. I'm going to start, though, in this early section. We have this encounter with young Jane, and her Aunt Reed has decided that she's going to send her off to school. She's getting rid of this kid. And so she calls in Reverend Brocklehurst, who runs the school, Lowood, and she's essentially saying, this is a bad child. Remember what you've learned about bad children in this world. You need to take her to the school and fix her because she's bad. Brocklehurst is a rather terrifying figure. And so early in the book, this is the encounter between Jane and Mr. Brocklehurst. And we'll read it together. And I'm going to have Bob read Brocklehurst lines. Sure, come on up.
Testing. So I'm playing the part of Heathcliff.
Okay, here we go. And she's about to be brought into the room so she can have an interview with Mr. Brocklehurst. The handle turned, the door unclosed, and passing through and curtsying low, I looked up at a black pillar. Such, at least, appeared to me at first sight. The straight, narrow, sable-clad shape standing erect on the rug. The grim face at the top was like a carved mask, placed above the shaft by way of capital. Mrs. Reed occupied her usual seat by the fireside. She made a signal to me to approach. I did so, and she introduced me to the stony stranger with the words, "This is the little girl respecting whom I applied to you." He, for it was a man, turned his head slowly towards where I stood, and having examined me with the two inquisitive-looking gray eyes which twinkled under a pair of bushy brows, said solemnly and in a bass voice,
Her size is small. What is her age?
10 years,
So much?
was the doubtful answer, and he prolonged his scrutiny for some minutes. Presently he addressed me.
Your name, little girl?
Jane Eyre, sir. In uttering these words, I looked up. He seemed to me a tall gentleman, but then I was very little. His features were large, and they and all the lines of his frame were equally harsh and prim.
Well, Jane Eyre, and are you a good child?
Impossible to reply to this in the affirmative. My little world held a contrary opinion. I was silent. Mrs. Reed answered me for me by an expressive shake of the head, adding soon, "Perhaps the less said on that subject, the better, Mr. Brocklehurst."
Sorry indeed to hear it, and she and I must have some talk.
And bending from the perpendicular, he installed his person in the armchair opposite Mrs. Reed's.
Come here.
I stepped across the rug. He placed me square and straight before him. What a face he had now that it was almost on level with mine. What a great nose, and what a mouth, and what large, prominent teeth.
No sight so sad as that of a naughty child, especially a naughty little girl. Do you know where the wicked go after death?
They go to hell, was my ready and orthodox answer.
And what is hell? Can you tell me that?
A pit full of fire.
And should you like to fall into that pit and to be burning there forever?
No, sir.
What must you do to avoid it?
This is one of my favorite moments. I deliberated a moment. My answer, when it did come, was objectionable. I must keep in good health and not die.
How can you keep in good health? Children younger than you die daily. I bury a little child of 5 years, only a day or two since, a good little child whose soul is now in heaven. It is to be feared the same could not be said of you, were you to be called hence.
Not being in a condition to remove his doubt, I only cast my eyes down on the 2 large feet planted on the rug and sighed, wishing myself far enough away.
I hope that sigh is from the heart, and that you repent of ever having been the occasion of discomfort to your excellent benefactress.
Benefactress, said I inwardly. They all call Mrs. Reed my benefactress. If so, benefactress is a disagreeable thing.
Do you say your prayers night and morning?
Yes, sir.
Do you read your Bible?
Sometimes.
With pleasure? And you fond of it? Are you fond of it?
I like Revelations and the book of Daniel and Genesis and Samuel and a little bit of Exodus and some parts of Kings and Chronicles and Job and Jonah.
And the Psalms, I hope you like them.
No, sir.
No? Oh, shocking. I have a little boy, younger than you, who knows 6 Psalms by heart. And when you ask him which he would rather have, a gingerbread nut to eat or a verse of a psalm to learn, he says, "Oh, the verse of a psalm. Angels sing psalms," he says. I wish to be a little angel here below. He then gets 2 nuts in recompense for his infant piety.
Psalms are not interesting, I remarked.
That proves you have a wicked heart, and you must pray to God to change it, to give you a new and clean one, to take away your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh.
I was about to propound a question, touching the manner in which that operation of changing my heart was to be performed, when Mrs. Reed interposed, telling me to sit down, and that she then proceeded to carry on the conversation herself.
Okay, I'll sit down.
So there you have a sense of Bronte's desire to address what to her felt like cruel hypocrisies in her midst, and especially in terms of what she encountered once she goes to school. This is not their first encounter. So Brocklehurst essentially humiliates Jane at school. He puts her on, makes her stand up on a pedestal, and he essentially calls her a liar in front of the entire class. And then when the school suffers a breakout of typhoid, he and his family stay far, far away and essentially abandon these kids. And in this school, Jane meets Helen Burns, who is a deeply devout young girl who is very ill. And it's thought that Helen Burns is modeled on Jane's oldest sister, Mariah, who died after having been at this school. And so I love that kind of sharp commentary here, but it was also informed by Bronte's profound grief. I think the loss of her 2 older sisters was something that she struggled with for her entire life. All of Bronte's heroines are motherless. Again, Bronte's mother died when she was 5 years old, when Charlotte, you'll notice I interpose Charlotte and Jane a lot. I try not to do that. But when she was 5 years old. So I'm very fascinated by the ways that Bronte, I think, wrestled with grief. And a lot of that occurred in the context of her finding ways through imagination, through social commentary, to feel like she could respond to what her family had struggled with. I do want to share that especially when it was discovered, that it was written by a woman, there was a lot of positive response to the novel, but there were, in light of this, what we just read, critics who called the novel anti-Christian, and that she was questioning and trying to overthrow authority, and she was also very conscious of the conditions of the working class in England. So Chartism is the rise of the working class And while she didn't necessarily agree with some of the sort of chaotic rebellion, she will often portray the ways in which those who are suffering under ill conditions and poverty have to sort of look for ways to survive that those like Brocklehurst should be concerned about but are not. And this did not slow her down. In fact, I think in a lot of ways it simply inspired her to continue her work. I'm not going to leave that up there. I'm going to go back to this one. Any questions? Y'all have anything that anybody wants to jump in with?
I just want to ask quickly, was it commonly thought that it was an autobiography?
Well, she calls it an autobiography of Jane Eyre. So it's called Jane because the book is Jane looking back on her life and telling the story of her life as though it were an autobiography, right? And sometimes, as we'll see in this next section, which I'm going to ask some other folks to read some parts, one thing that I love that she does is she will sometimes break through, I don't know if we'll get to this, but the very last paragraph of our packet, she will sometimes break through and talk to the reader. So she'll be going along and then she'll say, "Reader, this is what was going on and making me mad," or something like that. So she breaks through her story. So she's looking back, and this is one of the things, if people know the theologian Frederick Buechner, he talks about the ways that looking back on the story of your life and making sense of it, that's where you find meaning, that's where you find purpose. In a lot of ways, that is what Jane is doing. She's looking back over her life and looking for the places and moments that informed her sense of who she was as a person. So I'm going to jump ahead and have us look a little bit about what happens when she leaves the school. She goes to Thornfield to be a governess. This is where she will meet Rochester. This is where she cares for Adele and the young girl that he is in charge of. And Miss Fairfax is the mistress of the house there, the house manager, so to speak. And at Thornfield, you start to see, even when Jane has secure circumstances, when she has a good job, people are taking care of her, she becomes restless. And my students often pick up on these moments where you have a motif, which is a recurring event, a recurring theme, and there will be Jane looking out a window, and if you've been to England, you've seen the moors, she sees like this vast expanse of territory, and like she wants out of where she is. And there's this desire to sort of get out of a hemmed-in existence. And again, you've seen where she grew up. I mean, I think this is something that she was very conscious of, wanting more, feeling restless. And so I'd love for us to read a bit of this. It's some of my favorite passages. And y'all are hearing my voice a lot, so I'd love some readers to volunteer. Perhaps if there's a couple of anybody, but especially the English teachers in the room, there are a couple. So in this moment, it's one of these moments that she has described. And I think what I'd like to do is just read those first 3 paragraphs. So maybe we could have 3 folks to volunteer to read. Okay, yes, yes, okay, yes. I'll get you later. Okay, so let's read. If you'll read that first pair. You want to do the mics?
They won't be able to hear it.
Yes. Okay. All right. So if you'll read that first paragraph.
Okay. Anybody may blame me who likes when I add further that now and then, when I took a walk by myself in the grounds, when I went down to the gates and looked through them along the road, or while Adele played with her nurse and Mrs. Fairfax made jellies in the storeroom, I climbed the 3 staircases, raised the trapdoor of the attic, and having reached the leads, looked out afar over sequestered field and hill and a long dim skyline, that then I longed for a power of vision which might overpass that limit, which might reach the busy world, towns, regions full of life I had heard of but never seen, that then I desired more of practical experience than I possessed, more of intercourse with my kind, of acquaintance with variety of character than was here within my reach. I valued what was good in Mrs. Fairfax and what was good in Adele, but I believed in the existence of other and more vivid kinds of goodness, and what I believed in, I wished to behold.
Who blames me? Many, no doubt, and I shall be called discontented. I could not help it. The restlessness was in my nature. It agitated me to pain sometimes. Then my sole relief was to walk along the corridor of the third story, backwards and forwards, safe in the silence and solitude of the spot, and allow my mind's eye to dwell on whatever bright visions rose before it. And certainly they were many and glowing, to let my heart be heaved by the exultant movement, which, while it swelled it in trouble, expanded it with life, and best of all, to open my inward ear to a tale that was never ended, a tale my imagination created and narrated continuously, quickened with all of incident, life, fire, feeling that I desired and had not in my actual existence.
It is in vain to say human beings ought to be satisfied with tranquility. They must have action, and they will make it if they cannot find it. Millions are condemned to a stiller doom than mine, and millions are in silent revolt against their lot. Nobody knows how many rebellions besides political rebellions ferment in the masses of life which people earth. Women are supposed to be very calm generally, but women feel just as men feel. They need exercise for their faculties and a field for their efforts as much as their brothers do. They suffer from too rigid a restraint, too absolute a stagnation, precisely as men would suffer. And it is narrow-minded in their more privileged fellow creatures to say that they ought to confine themselves to making puddings and knitting stockings, to playing on the piano and embroidering bags. It is thoughtless to condemn them or laugh at them if they seek to do more or learn more than custom has pronounced necessary for their sex.
Thank you. So this is, as I've said, I mean, I don't know about you, but I just think that's just a remarkable expression of her desire for more. And it's very interesting because often right alongside these moments, she has some reference to something mysterious and kind of frightening happening. Because in the very next paragraph, so there she is in this big manor, which has a lot of dark stories, dark rooms. The very next paragraph, she says, "When thus alone, I not unfrequently heard Grace Poole's laugh." She thinks it's Grace Poole, one of the servants, but might not be. "The same peal, the same low, slow ha-ha, which when first heard had thrilled me. I heard too her eccentric murmurs, stranger than her laugh." So when she's at Thornfield, she starts hearing this laugh, this very spooky laugh ringing through the house, and she doesn't know what it is. I will say it is also an entrapped woman. If you've read the book, you know who I'm talking about. But it's interesting that she has this woman who is even more vulnerable than her, who's locked up. And that's where you get into some of the Gothic, some of the horror that gave Bronte a chance to write about really grim circumstances of women who are locked up, and which connects with this ongoing motif that she's developing for herself. And so I'll just say the name Bertha, you know who I'm talking about. And one thing that my students, we get fascinated to talk about at the end, that perhaps Jane and Bertha are not as far apart as one might think. This might entice you to read the book, but Bertha is in really tough circumstances. And at this point, Jane doesn't know she's in the house. She just hears this mysterious laughter and blames it on poor Grace Poole, the servant. And it's not actually her. So that's where you see some of this remarkable and sort of intense determination to wrestle with her circumstances as a brilliant woman. It's to think about what she was able to write coming out of her circumstances and wanting more, and what she was able to do with her 39 years on the planet. It's just staggering. And the last thing I'll quickly mention, because we're going to run out of time, and I'd like to leave just a few minutes if you have questions or comments. The last bit that I included gets at another reason that got her in trouble. She believed that she could experience divinity in nature, which at the time would have been considered, pagan, heretical. She would often describe the landscape and the trees as being infused with God. And this last section I've included is one of, if not one of Jane's darkest moments. She flees the home that gives her the only financial security she's ever had and the man that she loves, and she knows ethically she must leave. And she goes out into the moors of England, and she has nothing. She has no money. She has nobody that knows where she is. And I'll read a little bit of this, because she finds solace in nature, and she believes that the moon is speaking to her. It's very mystical, which at the time I think people would not necessarily know what to make of what she's saying. And remember, again, this is a motherless woman, so I'll read a couple of these paragraphs. That night I never thought to sleep, but a slumber fell on me as soon as I lay down in bed. I was transported in thought to the scenes of childhood. I dreamt I lay in the Red Room at Gateshead. That's where she has that scary encounter with her dead uncle. That the night was dark and my mind impressed with strange fears. The light that long ago had struck me into a syncope, when she faints, recalled in this vision, seemed glidingly to mount the wall and tremblingly to pause in the center of the obscured ceiling. I lifted up my head to look. The roof resolved to clouds, high and dim. The gleam was such as the moon imparts to vapors she is about to sever. I watched her come, watched with the strangest anticipation, as though some word of doom were to be written on her disk. She broke forth as never moon yet burst from cloud. A hand first penetrated the sable folds and waved them away. Then, not a moon, but a white human form shone in the azure. Inclining a glorious brow earthward, it gazed and gazed on me. It spoke to my spirit. Immeasurably distant was the tone, yet so near. It whispered in my heart, my daughter, flee temptation. Mother, I will. And then she leaves. And then has this desperate moment in those next couple of passages, and I'll read just a little bit after the first paragraph. I touched the heath. It was dry and yet warm with the heat of the summer day. I looked at the sky. It was pure. A kindly star twinkled just above the chasm ridge. The dew fell, but with propitious softness. No breeze whispered. Nature seemed to me benign and good. I thought she loved me, outcast as I was, and I, who from man could anticipate only mistrust, rejection, insult, clung to her with filial fondness. And so she really feels saved and held by her natural surroundings until St. John, it's pronounced St. John, but St. John finds her, and lo and behold, she discovers some relatives who come out of the moors. And that was always Jane's deep desire, was to have family. So she finds family, and then, lo and behold, inherits a considerable amount of money. But she would rather have the relatives than the money. So, as you can see, there is so much that this woman pulled together, grew out of a somewhat traditional religious background, but due to her circumstances, engaged in some exploration that really made her far more radical than I think sometimes she's portrayed to be. And so if you haven't read the book, I hope you will. I'll stop there, see if anybody has questions or comments. We have about 5 minutes. Yes, Leslie.
You can already tell. But I love the way you invite your 17-year-olds to respond. And I'm really curious, what are some of the takes that they have on this book?
I'd say there's a range. A number of students love the book. David Quillian's here. I've taught 2 of his daughters in English, and they both received it with so much imagination and appreciation and worked so hard with it. Did a great job with it. In fact, this year, his daughter Margaret wrote a great paper on Jane Eyre in which she's really exploring the identity of this character. I think at the first session when we had the panel, I told the story years ago. I taught a young man who, if he walked in here right now, you would be like, oh, he's a football player, wrestler, big guy. You know. He finished the book early, and one of the best lines I've ever heard, I stepped into my room and I heard him say, I had to finish early because I had to find out what happened. So many of the students respond really well. For many of the students, it's a struggle. I mean, like, this is the book, right? So, and as we talked about a few weeks ago, to read a book like this for a lot of the kids is plowing through. And so what I work to do with the kids who are struggling with it is just keep reminding them that they are growing as thinkers, even if they consider themselves more math and science students, that this is almost like an intellectual workout, and we have a lot of celebration at the end. But I think some students, when I write college recs, one of the questions they have to answer is, what's a book that you at first thought you weren't going to like and you grew to appreciate it? And this and Othello, Shakespeare's Othello, are the 2 most common answers, and from boys and girls. So I'm often pleased, but I'm not going to say that everyone absolutely loves it. But as y'all know, that's the way it goes. Yes. Yes.
Was there much rivalry between the Bronte sisters?
I don't think so. I think they loved each other deeply. I don't know that it would be rivalry. I think they were quirky. I mean, they did some weird, they were kind of odd, I think. But I think they shared that. I know that Emily often, I mean, like I said before, there was a point where there was a publisher who was suggesting that the same person had written all the books, and Charlotte was determined that each sister had got her due, so she exposed who they were, and Emily was furious at her when she did that. And that was a real rupture for them. So I don't know that I would call it rivalry, but they were like these feisty folks who spent a lot of time together, but deep, deep love, and as I said, just such profound sadness, because none of them, like Patrick Bronte outlived all of his children. So it was a family informed by deep love, and then also, that loss. Yeah.
One of the many reasons I love this meeting at 10 a.m. is because of stuff like this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
No, it's just fascinating, and I've never read Jane Eyre, and now I really want to read it.
Yeah.
Is there any secondary source that you would recommend about spirituality in her books, or about you did mention the biography.
I don't know if this is a great biography called A Fiery Heart. It's a great title by Claire.